So I think that's a good transition over to a talk by Peter Zeehan about who some of the best allies for the US could be moving forward. He is a geopolitical consultant and expert, producing a lot of great insights on YouTube about his opinions. Kind of rose to prominence after predicting the war in Ukraine, just based on the history of Russia and their areas of strategic importance and some of the actions that were happening really pushing NATO up against Ukraine. So whether you agree with that or not, he predicted that war years in advance and yeah, has many great insights, I would say, on geopolitics and the world at large. So let's dive into his opinion on a few of the more fringe allies that would make sense for the US. Obviously, there's kind of the core traditional allies, but he also brings up something that's relevant to the previous topic of the commodity super cycle, diving into what countries would be important to make sure that America and its allies can secure the resources they need for the years ahead.
Almost didn't consider, but in the world we're moving to, a lot of the places where raw materials come from are going to be really unstable, and there are a few places in the world that are just have so much of it in incredible concentration that we're going to need them one way or the other. And the two countries in question are Saudi Arabia and the Congo. These are countries that are massive producers of raw materials that do very little with refining, very little with value added. They're basically mines with people. And we're going to have to figure out some way to continue to access the copper, the cobalt, the platinum, the palladium, the diamonds, and all that other good stuff that these two countries just have in spades. Because if we can't figure that out, the only other real player in the world that is going to be able to produce the volumes of material we need is Russia. And the whole point away from globalization is that you lose those strategic complications. So Congo, South Africa, despite all of their problems, and there's a list, so much better than dealing with Moscow.
Yeah, he obviously went through all the other main allies the US would have in the decades ahead. But here we see things that are relevant to this commodity super cycle, as well as relevant to some of the revolutions we're seeing in things like AI, robotics, and electrification, electric vehicles and electrification of the world. So, things like cobalt, the Congo produces something like 80% of the world's cobalt. So the Congo produces 73% of the world's global cobalt production. So really, and that's critical for things like batteries, electric vehicles, drones, robotics. Saudi Arabia, obviously one of the biggest producers of oil in the world. And in their vision for Vision 2030, I believe it's called. And in their Vision 2030, Saudi Arabia has basically taken a stance that they want to diversify their economy and be even more focused on producing these raw materials that the world needs. This was interesting because these aren't really the allies you think about, and it kind of ties into, what resources are we really going to need in the world? Because when you look at many of the world's resources, they're dominated by China producing those resources. And if we're moving towards a world where relationships between the US and China continue to escalate and it becomes more and more of a trade war, you don't want all of your raw materials being produced by your peer rival. So this is something that the United States and allies of the United States need to continue to think about and make sure that we have our supply chains diversified, because we can't be doing business with a country that doesn't let us do business, that steals our IP and doesn't play fair. If you want to play fair, if you want to open up your markets, you want to be capitalistic, let's go, let's do it. But this is no way of doing business. And so we really have to think about how we do that. Luckily, the US is incredibly rich in natural resources, but the reality is, unfortunately, most Americans, most Western countries do not want to go to work doing the mining work that is required. It's not environmentally friendly to do much of this refining and processing of these raw materials. So much of it will continue to get done outside of Western countries, and we need to make sure we have those supply chains secure. All right, awesome.